Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the How Film Show. Special because today I'm going to be going over a project which I worked on recently, and I thought today I'd just give you guys a bit of a summary as to what this experience was like. This is my first experience directing anything, let alone directing a commercial project, so really I thought it'd be good to share some of the experiences I had. This was a commercial we made for a client, that client being Smartmove Removals, was a company who approached us earlier this summer. During lockdown, they had to wear these snoods, obviously, to stop the spread of COVID. That, along with the Smartmove hoodie hoods, they noticed that actually they looked a bit like ninjas. So why don't we make a ad about ninjas removing the contents of a house? Now, as we went into sort of pre-production, through this process you start off with various scripts. So the ad essentially revolved around these three ninjas who would come to a house, remove all its contents, and then leave. About a 1 minute long ad. So now we're moving on to what I'd say would be the second stage of pre-production. So this is casting, crew hire, and equipment hire. These three ninjas that we got for the ad, they are trained and experienced parkour artists. We had Martin, who had a background in ballet and actually had been in the Resident Evil Netflix show where he played a zombie. We had Will, who had more of a climbing perspective, and we finally had James. And James was someone who had more experience in parkour. That was sort of his background. So you've got these various different skills that the ninjas already have. And what I learned quite early on from these guys is that the skills they had, they were individual. They were different from each other. And I worked that into the script. I made it so that each of the different ninjas' entrances into the house, they vary. And something that was very important to me is that you needed to be able to tell them apart clearly. And I did that with different coloured costumes, different coloured bands. So you've got yellow, blue, and red. Okay, so we have our crew. We have our initial crew. We've got me, Izzy as producer, Tom as co-producer, Zaid as assistant director. We have Amelia, who's our DP, Becky as our set design, Raphael, who's our grip, Fabi as our gaffer, and finally, last but not least, the incredible Math, a man who I'm convinced was born with a boom pole in his hands, as our sound operator, our boom operator. Now, next up for pre-production, we had location scouting. Now, luckily, Smartmove Removals is a company that removes houses. So our client already had a pretty good resource of people they could go to if they wanted a house to film in. Thankfully, the house that we ended up shooting in was huge. So we turned up there for some scouting, got a bunch of videos, got a good impression as to what this was actually going to look like. It was clear that there were a few stunts that just weren't going to work. Number one, the wall we wanted to climb up was not big enough, and that there was no ledge at the top for them to grab onto. Secondly, we noticed that the ceilings and the door frames we were after, they were too tight to do a lot of the stunts that we were looking at. Problem we'd realised pretty quickly with the location scouting is that the house itself was this incredible house with lots of great posters and art up on the wall. One thing you've got to remember for posters and art, if there's any sort of brand or any sort of identifiable piece of intellectual property, it's copyright, and you can't include it in your ad. Now we're looking at the final stage of pre-production. We're getting pretty close to shoot day now. The final thing I wanted to do was I wanted to get a rehearsal with the performers. I wanted to make sure that they knew the stunts inside out before we went to the shoot, and I also made them work through the entire ad, doing every single stunt and every single shot that would need to be in the final thing. Cool. And then we'll take another cut. What I also did is I made sure that Raphael, our grip, was there and was able to record the actual stunts as they were taking place, so that at the end of the rehearsal day, we had this essential skeleton idea of what the ad would look like. All the shots in the exact same location and all the ninjas doing the stunts they need to do. We got the blocking down, we got the shots right, and we even used this specific lens that we were going to use on the actual day. That way, everyone had a pretty good idea, or as good an idea as they could have, as to what they'd actually be doing on the final day. Production. And here is the actual shooting of the thing. But before that, we needed a bit of time for setup. So me, Raphael, and Fabi got there late in the afternoon the day before, got all the equipment set up, and checked everything was working. Camera, tripod for lights, katana. Fabi, what's happening right now?
We just lost an arm, one of our crew members.
This is Vacancies, our best boy here. Now, we came across our first issue when we tried to get the camera set up to this Ronin gimbal.
And I mean that is Millimeters, isn't it?
We probably could have got it to balance if we'd had a couple of hours, but unfortunately we didn't. And so, because of that, we were unable to use any handheld shots for the entire thing. It sounds like a real blow, but when I made the storyboards for the ad, I fitted in these shots which were handheld, and alongside them I fitted in these shots which were static, to make sure that on the day, if we couldn't shoot handheld for whatever reason, we could just cut those out and they wouldn't be even needed. So, thankfully that wasn't an issue, but only because of pre-planning. Apart from that, setup on the day before all went very well, and we left all the cameras there, went to bed probably a bit later than we should have, and set timers ready for the morning after. Woke up at, I want to say 5:30.
Emotions currently, I would say a little bit of trepidation, definitely. Trepidation that that it's not gonna look like ninjas removing house and more like burglars in snoods, sort of robbing someone.
Yeah.
Sensations.
Give us some poses. Let's see the movement on them. I like bit of crouching. Excellent. You've got all you need, really. So ninja. As it turned out, everything worked pretty smoothly, and everyone was able to work and get along very well. It was a very good crew. I was very, very fortunate. And the ninjas are on the trampoline currently, which is just what we like to see. Come on, Raphael, let's see it. Let's see some backflips, yeah, come on. However, some things we did come up against, and these are things which, again, you always need to take into consideration whenever you're doing a shoot. First of all, weather. It rained and rained and rained while we were shooting. Time pressure only really became an issue when we were shooting with the actual Smartmove truck. You can see the guy at the end of the ad. Matt is the actual owner of Smartmove, and he was only there available for a short period of time because he was going on holiday shortly afterwards. So we really had to make sure we got those shots done quickly. Now, due to several revisions of the storyboard, things didn't go quite as smoothly as they could have. However, in the end, we got it done. So I say at the end of the shoot, we got left with a really good experience. We're feeling really great about how the whole thing went. Everything was looking pretty smooth and we were pretty happy. So this was the first commercial project that most of us had worked on.
This looks so hard. This looks like an album cover.
Post-production was a process which was pretty straightforward and was something we really had very few hitches with. However, we had a couple, and I'll just go over them briefly. Because I had essentially made the ad previously with the skeleton cut, which I did in rehearsals, there wasn't really anything new I was looking at. The only thing I was seeing for the first time was the actual footage, but all the shots and all the stunts were pretty much the same. Now, color grading was something that was probably the hardest with this project. But essentially with color grading, what was very important to me is I needed to make sure that this was something that looks cinematic, stylized, very sort of saturated, and most importantly, it needed to look like the photo at the end of the video. The colors needed to be roughly the same. Sound was something I had neglected pretty badly until the last minute in this process. And in order to try and remedy that, there are various different attempts to try and make some sort of soundtrack which I went down. First one is I tried to look for some sort of royalty-free track that might work with this. No luck. Coming off that, I tried to make my own sort of soundtrack for it. And needless to say, it didn't really end up looking that good. But thankfully I've got a mate called Gabe, and Gabe goes to this music university called BIM in Brighton. Sent him a couple of influences because I'd been sent some by the clients. Essentially, 2 weeks later, we've got the soundtrack which you have for finished product. Finishing touches, there were a couple. Essentially, I just needed to slap the Smartmove logo on the top, and at the end the clients wanted a small little bit where you would essentially see thoughts on the general removal process and Smartmove. So went on Photoshop, did a bit of 3D work, and made these little speech bubbles, filled them in with some text, and got them to slide past the final credit sequence while Gabe's soundtrack played underneath. After that, it was essentially just a process of me sending it backwards and forwards with Matt and Justine from Smartmove, getting responses, fine-tuning it, making sure it was something they were entirely happy with, and then finally sending it off as a final edit. But that's my experience, that's my general sort of summary. This is something which I got a lot out of, and I'd love to do again. All these different people that were part of the project, all the different ninjas, all the different members of the crew, everyone who started in this process at the beginning. Huge thank you to you guys. If you love what they did in this project, reach out to them. Bring them on board with whatever you're doing. That's all I've got to say. Goodbye.